You know what's funny about perfect days? They always precede a perfect disaster. This morning, October 12th, started off picture perfect. A crisp, cool autumn breeze rustling through the towering oaks outside the grand ballroom windows of the Thorne Manor on Long Island. Sunlight, soft and golden, spilled across acres of manicured lawns, glinting off the crystal flutes being arranged by a small army of caterers. The air itself practically hummed with an expectant, almost theatrical silence, a pause before the grand performance. My daughter, Sarah, was getting married today, to Caleb Thornton. Another Thornton, if you catch my drift. Old money, new money. Money so old it practically has barnacles, and money so new it's still sticky from the printing press. And they were all here, every last one of them, from Greenwich to the Hamptons, dressed in their finest, smelling of privilege and expensive perfume, ready to watch my little girl join their ranks. Me? I was just Tommy O'Connor, or Tommy Bulldog, to anyone who really knew me back in the Brooklyn docks. Today, I was merely the father of the bride, a man in a rented tux that felt like a straitjacket, my hands, usually calloused and smelling of sawdust and concrete, feeling oddly useless. They'd build houses, bridges, even entire neighborhoods, but they couldn't build a bridge between my world and the one Sarah had so desperately chased. I stood by the window of the suite they'd given me. A courtesy, I suppose, like offering a stray dog a bone. It was huge, unnecessarily opulent, with furnishings that probably cost more than my first house. I looked at my reflection in the polished glass. A man of 55, a little shorter than I'd like, with a thick head of salt and pepper hair cut short. The kind of no-nonsense style you get from a barber who still knows how to use a straight razor. My eyes, usually described as piercing or seeing too much by those who'd crossed me, were just tired today. Bone tired. But there was a spark, a flicker of something beneath the weariness, a quiet resolve that had been forged in the crucible of Brooklyn's grittiest corners, in a life that taught you to always look twice, to always keep your own counsel, and to never, ever underestimate anyone, especially not the quiet ones. My mind was a coiled spring. For weeks, ever since the engagement party, I'd felt it, that familiar prickle at the back of my neck, the kind that used to warn me when a union negotiation was about to turn ugly or when a rival crew was about to make a move on our territory. Something wasn't right. Sarah had been distant. More than distant, actually. She'd always been a little ashamed of my working-class roots, despite the fact that those roots had paid for her private schools, her fancy university, and now, this obscenely expensive wedding. But it felt different now. Colder. Sharper. As if she'd finally chosen her side, and it wasn't mine. I reached into my inner jacket pocket, my fingers brushing against the small, cool metal of the voice recorder. An old habit, a relic from my days in the docks, when a man's word was worth less than the paper it wasn't written on, and proof was everything. I'd seen too many broken promises, too many smiles that hid daggers. It was charged ready, just in case. You never knew when you'd need to capture a truth, especially when everyone else was busy living a lie. I straightened my tie, a simple black silk knot. It felt alien. I preferred the open collar of a work shirt, the solid weight of a hard hat. But today, for Sarah, I would play the part. I would be the quiet, unassuming father, the one who blended into the background, the one they looked through. Let them. That's precisely when they never saw the trap. My calm smile, the one my construction crews knew meant someone was about to learn a very expensive lesson, was firmly in place. I thought of Margaret, my wife, Sarah's mother. Gone too soon, 10 years ago, taken by that relentless cancer. She would have loved this day, the spectacle, the joy. Or maybe not. Margaret, with her sharp lawyer's mind and her even sharper wit, always saw through the glittering facade. She knew the true cost of things, the hidden clauses in the fine print. And in her final days, weak as she was, she'd given me a strange, cryptic instruction, a secret message for Sarah to be delivered only when she forgets who she is and where she comes from. At the time, I'd brushed it off as the ramblings of a fading mind, a mother's anxious love. But now, with the prickle on my neck growing into a full-blown itch, I wondered if Margaret, even then, had seen something I hadn't. Had she known this perfect day would be anything but, the door creaked open. It was Tony, one of the caterers, looking flustered. "Mr. O'Connor? They're calling for the father of the bride. Time for the photos." I nodded, adjusted my cuffs, and took one last look at my reflection at the quiet man in the ill-fitting tux. "Right," I said, my voice low and steady. "Let's go." The stage was set, and I had a feeling, a deep, unsettling certainty that the disaster was about to begin. The ballroom was a masterpiece of excess. Chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen tears. Thousands of white roses formed in fragrant cloud, and a string quartet played something classical and airy. 300 guests, a sea of designer suits and gowns, buzzed with polite chatter, their voices a low, steady drone that did little to mask the subtle currents of judgment and expectation flowing beneath the surface. I walked Sarah down the aisle, her arm stiff in mine. She looked stunning, of course, in a gown that must have cost more than my first year's earnings. But her smile, though radiant for the cameras, felt brittle, artificial. Her eyes, usually so vibrant, held a strange, calculating glint whenever they landed on Caleb or his father, Richard Thornton. The ceremony was a blur of vows and platitudes. I stood there, a quiet observer, my gaze occasionally drifting to Richard Thornton. He sat in the front row, a man carved from granite and tailored silk, his eyes assessing the room, the guests, the sheer cost of it all, with the detached air of a corporate raider surveying a new acquisition. He caught my eye once, a fleeting, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips, as if we shared some private, unpleasant joke. It solidified my unease. Margaret's words echoed in my mind. "Always watch the quiet ones, Tommy. They're the ones with the sharpest teeth." But Richard wasn't quiet. He was loud, even in his silence. He was a predator who didn't need to roar. The reception was worse. The air thickened with champagne, laughter, and a pervasive sense of self-congratulation. I nursed a single whiskey, watching Sarah navigate the room like a seasoned diplomat, her hand always in Caleb's, her smile fixed. She barely glanced my way, except for a brief, almost dismissive wave. It wasn't the first time. For years, I'd watched her drift away, drawn to the glittering lights of a world I couldn't provide, even if I'd wanted to. I built her a solid foundation, brick by brick, honest work. She wanted a castle built on air. Then came the toasts. Caleb went first, a slick, rehearsed speech about love, destiny, and the beautiful future they would build together. His words were as hollow as a drum, all rhythm and no soul. Richard Thornton followed, a masterclass in corporate rhetoric, praising his son's choice, welcoming Sarah into their distinguished family. His gaze lingered on me for a fraction of a second, a silent challenge. I met it head-on, my own face a mask of polite indifference. Finally, it was Sarah's turn. She took the microphone from Caleb, her movements fluid and confident. A hush fell over the room. This was her moment. My heart, against my better judgment, swelled with a flicker of paternal pride, a desperate hope that she might say something, anything, that spoke to the years of sacrifice, the quiet love that had shaped her. She smiled, a dazzling, almost predatory flash. Her eyes swept across the room, past me, lingering on Richard Thornton with an almost possessive adoration. "I am so incredibly happy today," she began, her voice clear and resonant, amplified by the sound system. "To finally be joining a family, a real family. A family that understands what it means to truly belong." My gut tightened. I knew what was coming. I'd seen it in her eyes earlier, in the way she'd avoided me. The quiet warning from Margaret roared in my ears. Sarah paused, her smile faltering just enough to seem almost apologetic, almost regretful, but the coldness in her eyes betrayed it. She turned, and for the first time, her gaze landed squarely on me. It was a look of pity mixed with disdain. "You know," she continued, her voice dropping a notch, as if sharing a painful secret with the room, "my father, he's a good man, I suppose. In his own way. He means well. But he's just a struggling contractor. Always in his work boots, smelling of sawdust and concrete. He's always been so out of place in my world. He never truly understood ambition or elegance or real wealth. Honestly, he's just a pathetic pauper. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they were true, they weren't, not in the way she meant them, but because they were delivered with such casual cruelty, such public humiliation. A ripple of suppressed laughter, a chorus of murmurs, swept through the room. I saw Caleb squeeze her hand, a triumphant smirk on his face. Richard Thornton, across the room, raised his glass in a barely perceptible salute. They were in on it. This wasn't just Sarah's thoughtless cruelty. It was a calculated performance. My jaw tightened, but my expression remained blank. Pathetic pauper. After everything, after years of building, literally building, her life, her future, after paying for this very wedding, this opulent display of her newfound status, I felt the heat rising in my chest, a cold fury simmering beneath my placid exterior. The world seemed to shrink, focusing on her cruel, dismissive words. But now, she finished, her voice regaining its bright, triumphant tone. Now I have a real family. A family that understands me. A family worthy of my status. And I couldn't be happier. She raised her glass, the applause a roar in my ears. I saw her look at me again, her eyes daring me to react, to embarrass myself further. She wanted to show. She wanted to prove her new allegiance, her final break from the man who had given her everything. For a long moment, I sat there, the weight of her words pressing down on me. My hands, still resting on my knees, twitched. The room was a blur. But then a quiet strength, a familiar resolve, settled over me. Pathetic pauper. That was their narrative. Not mine. Not Margaret's. I pushed back my chair, slowly, deliberately. The scrape of wood on the polished floor was loud in the sudden lull. All eyes turned to me. Sarah's smile faltered, a flicker of surprise, then irritation. Caleb looked wary. Richard Thornton's smirk vanished, replaced by a calculating stare. I didn't rush. I walked towards the podium, each step measured, deliberate. The path felt miles long. I reached the microphone, adjusted it slightly, the small thump as I tapped it resonating through the speakers. My gaze swept over the room, meeting Sarah's, then Caleb's, then Richard's. Their faces were an open book to me now. Surprise, apprehension, a dawning realization that they might have miscalculated. "If you'll indulge me," I said, my voice low but clear, carrying to every corner of the vast ballroom. The wedding planner, a harried young woman, rushed forward, whispering, "Mr. O'Connor, perhaps it's best we move on to the cake cutting." I raised a hand, stopping her without even looking. My eyes were fixed on Sarah. "My daughter is right," I said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. "She is entering a new family today. And in honor of that, and in honor of her mother, Margaret, I have a message." A ripple of confusion went through the guests. Sarah's brow furrowed. Richard Thornton leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, suddenly very still. "Margaret," I continued, my voice steady, betraying none of the earthquake raging inside me, "was a woman of great wisdom, and she always believed in truth. She asked me, in her final days, to deliver a very specific message to Sarah. Not just any message, but one to be shared on a day like this, when she forgets who she is and where she comes from." I paused, letting the words hang in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from celebratory to tense, expectant. Everyone sensed it. Something was about to break. "So, Sarah," I said, my voice still calm, but with an edge of steel that only I could hear. "Your mother always said that true value isn't measured in gold, but in how you face the truth. And she also asked me to tell you this, precisely these words: 5 keys, 1 strongbox, and never forget about the golden bridge." I watched her face, the slow dawning of confusion, then alarm. Caleb looked utterly bewildered. But Richard Thornton went white. His eyes, usually so hard, widened almost imperceptibly, and a bead of sweat glistened on his forehead. I held their gaze for another long moment, letting the cryptic words settle in the sudden, absolute silence of the ballroom. Then, I simply placed the microphone back on its stand, turned, and walked back to my seat, my movements slow, deliberate, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. But the storm, I knew, had just begun to gather. The silence that followed was deafening, thick with unasked questions and unspoken tension. It hung in the air, a palpable thing, heavier than any of the crystal chandeliers. Sarah stood by the microphone, utterly bewildered, her perfect wedding smile shattered. Caleb, next to her, looked like a deer caught in headlights, his face a mask of confusion. The guests, who moments ago had been buzzing with polite indifference, were now a tableau of stunned faces, their eyes darting between me and the bridal party, trying to decipher the coded message. But my gaze wasn't on them. It was on Richard Thornton. He was still as stone, but the color had drained from his face, leaving it a sickly gray. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, were now wide with a flicker of something raw fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. He didn't look at Sarah or Caleb. He looked at me, a desperate, silent plea in his eyes, as if begging me to retract the words, to deny their existence. That single, fleeting expression was all the confirmation I needed. Margaret hadn't been rambling. She'd been laying a trap designed with precision, waiting for the perfect moment to spring. I sank back into my chair, my calm exterior unwavering, though a tremor of satisfaction, cold and sharp, ran through me. The small, almost imperceptible click of the voice recorder, which I'd activated the moment Sarah began her scathing speech, was a secret reassurance in my pocket. Every word, every cruel dismissal, every terrified gasp, captured. The wedding planner, bless her heart, tried to regain control. Let's cut the cake, shall we? She chirped, her voice too bright, too forced. The string quartet, sensing the shift in atmosphere, tentatively picked up a more cheerful tune, but it sounded off-key, discordant. Sarah, still reeling, finally snapped out of her daze. She forced a strained smile, a pathetic attempt to brush off my words as an eccentric father's ramblings. "Oh, Dad," she laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound. "Always with your riddles. You know Mom loved her little games." She tried to make eye contact with me, a desperate, pleading look that asked for complicity. I gave her nothing. My face remained impassive. Caleb, ever the dutiful puppet, tried to play along. "Just one of Mr. O'Connor's charming quirks, darling," he said, forcing a chuckle. But his eyes, too, kept darting to his father, then back to me. He wasn't laughing. They cut the cake. The photographers captured the moment, but the joy had bled out of the room. The celebration had turned into something else, something heavier, laced with an unspoken question mark. Guests started whispering, their gazes lingering. Some looked at me with a new curiosity, others at Sarah with pity, and a few, the more perceptive ones, at Richard Thornton with subtle suspicion. The seed of doubt had been planted. As the evening wore on, the facade slowly crumbled. The speeches became forced, the dancing less enthusiastic. Sarah, despite her earlier triumph, looked increasingly miserable. She kept trying to catch my eye, to approach me, but I consistently avoided her, always just a step out of reach, always engaged in a polite but brief conversation with a distant relative or an old friend from the construction business who'd also been invited out of obligation. I heard snippets of conversation. What did he mean by that? Golden Bridge? Sounds like some kind of coded message. Did you see Richard Thornton's face? The quiet ones, the ones I always watched, were watching now. Finally, as the party dwindled and the last of the reluctant guests began to depart, Sarah approached me, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She'd clearly been crying. "Dad," she whispered, her voice raw. "What was that? What did you do?" I looked at her, my daughter, standing amidst the ruins of her perfect day. "I did exactly what your mother asked me to do, Sarah," I replied, my voice devoid of warmth but not of sadness. "I deliver a message meant for you, a message she wanted you to hear, especially today." "But, Golden Bridge? 5 keys," she stammered. "What does it mean?" "That, my dear, is for you to figure out," I said, a flicker of the old Tommy, the one who led men and solved problems, returning to my voice. Or maybe it's for all of us to figure out. Some truths are too big for one person to carry. Before she could press me further, Richard Thornton himself appeared, his face a mask of strained politeness, though his eyes burned with barely contained fury. Caleb hovered behind him, looking like a chastened child. "Thomas," Richard said, his voice dangerously smooth. "Perhaps we should discuss this private matter, away from prying ears." He glanced pointedly at Sarah. I met his gaze head-on. "There's nothing private about truth, Richard. And Margaret, bless her soul, always believed that. But yes, by all means, we can talk." I could see the gears turning in his head. He was trying to gauge me, to understand if I was a foolish old man clinging to sentimental memories or something far more dangerous. He wouldn't find his answers in my eyes. "Sarah, Caleb," I said, turning to them briefly, "enjoy your honeymoon, or what's left of it." Then I walked away, leaving them standing in the fading grandeur of the ballroom, the whispers of the Golden Bridge still echoing in the empty spaces. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, the same breeze that had promised a perfect day now felt like the harbinger of a storm that Margaret, in her infinite wisdom, had prepared for. And I, Tommy O'Connor, the pathetic pauper, was about to become its reluctant but very capable architect. The game had officially begun, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was a game Richard Thornton would regret ever starting. The drive back to my modest home in Queens felt longer than usual. The silent tension in the car was a physical presence, as heavy as the secrets I now carried. Dave McMahon, my old friend and now my most trusted confidant, was at the wheel. He'd picked me up after the reception, his usual jovial face replaced by a somber curiosity. Dave hadn't asked questions, not directly. He'd just given me a knowing look as I got in, a silent acknowledgement that something big had gone down. That's why I trusted Dave. He knew when to talk, and more importantly, when to listen. Or just drive. "You really rattled him, Tommy," Dave finally said, breaking the silence as we crossed the Queensboro Bridge, the glittering skyline of Manhattan a cold, distant spectacle. Richard Thornton. Never seen him look like that. Like he'd swallowed a poisoned frog. I grunted, staring out the window. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, Dave. And in a way, he had. "Margaret." We pulled up to my 2-story house, a comfortable, unassuming place on a quiet, tree-lined street. It wasn't a mansion, but it was paid for, every brick laid by my own hands or the hands of men I trusted. It was solid, real, everything Sarah had called pathetic pauper just an hour ago. Inside, I shed the ridiculous tux, tossing it onto a chair. I pulled on an old, faded work shirt and a pair of worn jeans. This felt right. This was me. I poured myself a single malt, neat, and gestured for Dave to do the same. "Tell me, Tommy," Dave said, swirling his whiskey. "What was that about? 5 keys, 1 strongbox, Golden Bridge?" I took a slow sip, letting the amber liquid warm its way down. "It was Margaret's insurance policy, Dave. Her last will and testament, in a way. She always said if anything ever happened to her, or if Sarah ever needed reminding of who she truly was, I was to deliver that message. And you never did, never felt the need. Until today. Sarah made her choice. She chose their world over ours, over her mother's memory. And the look on Richard Thornton's face, it confirmed what I'd always suspected. I closed my eyes, letting the whiskey and the memories wash over me. Margaret. She was a force of nature, my Margaret. I met her at a union meeting, believe it or not. She was a fiery young law student, volunteering for legal aid, passionate about workers' rights. I was the rough around the edges, pragmatic leader of the Longshoremen's Union, more comfortable with a fist fight than a legal brief. We were opposites, but somehow we just fit. She saw past the tough exterior, saw the man who wanted to build something real, something fair. I saw her sharp mind, her unwavering sense of justice, and a beauty that made my heart ache. She joined a big corporate law firm after graduation, Thornton Group Legal. Ironically, she wanted to change the world from the inside, she said. I laughed, telling her the inside of those places was where the rot truly began. She just smiled that knowing smile of hers. Maybe, she'd said, but sometimes, Tommy, you need to see the rot to truly understand how to clean it up. For years, her work was a mystery to me. She'd come home late, tired, her mind often miles away, grappling with complex contracts and corporate maneuvers. She never spoke about the specifics, citing client confidentiality, but I could always tell when something was bothering her. Her jaw would be tighter, her sleep restless. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd find her staring out the window, a thoughtful, almost haunted look in her eyes. "Everything all right, Margie?" I'd ask. She'd just sigh, lean into me. "Just corporate politics, Tommy. The kind of dirt that leaves stains you can never quite scrub clean." She always had a knack for metaphors, for simplifying complex things into undeniable truths. She once told me, "If something ever happens to me, Tommy, remember, my love for you and Sarah is a bridge. A strong one. But bridges can crumble if the foundation is rotten. Always check the foundation." I'd brushed it off as one of her lawyerly anxieties, a habit of seeing threats where none existed. Now, I wasn't so sure. After Sarah was born, Margaret scaled back her work, focusing more on family. But she never truly left the legal world. She became an independent consultant, taking on selective cases, often for charities or small businesses, keeping her mind sharp. She also started dabbling in investments, quietly building up a nest egg, always telling me it was just in case. Just in case of what, she never said. She'd always been independent, fiercely so. She'd handled her own finances, insisted on a separate account, though we shared everything else. "A woman needs her own autonomy, Tommy," she'd say with a wink. "Especially a smart one." Then came the cancer. It was swift, brutal. In her final months, she became strangely focused, almost obsessive. She spent hours in her study, poring over old files, making notes, writing in a small leather-bound journal she always kept locked. She'd make cryptic phone calls, always in hushed tones. I thought it was her way of coping, finding order in the chaos of her dying body. One afternoon, a few weeks before she passed, she called me to her bedside. She was weak, her voice a bare whisper. "Tommy," she'd said, her eyes, usually so bright, now dim but still filled with a fierce intelligence. "I need you to promise me something. If Sarah ever truly loses her way, if she forgets who we are, who I was, you give her that message. 5 keys, 1 strongbox, Golden Bridge. Don't explain it. Just say it. And watch Richard Thornton's face." I promised, my throat tight with emotion, my mind reeling. I thought she was delirious. "What's in the strongbox, Margie?" I'd asked gently. She just smiled, a faint, knowing smile. "Truth, Tommy, and maybe a little justice. For those who can't fight for themselves." Then she drifted off to sleep, never to fully awaken with that same clarity again. Now, sitting in my living room, the memory of Richard Thornton's ashen face burned in my mind. Margaret hadn't been delirious. She'd been preparing for this exact moment. She'd laid a trail, a path to a truth so dangerous that it had sent a shiver down the spine of one of the most powerful men in New York. "Dave," I said, putting down my glass, the weariness in my eyes replaced by steel resolve. "I need you to do some digging, discreetly. I need everything you can find on Thornton Group. Their big projects, their financials, their corporate structure. Especially anything about a project called Golden Bridge." Dave nodded, his usually relaxed posture stiffening with purpose. "You got it, Tommy. Consider it done. What about those keys and the strongbox?" I stood up, walked over to a built-in bookshelf, and ran my hand over the spines of Margaret's old law books. "That," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "is where we start." Margaret had a small, antique strongbox. She kept it in her study, and I'm pretty sure I know where she kept the first key. The pathetic pauper had just found his purpose, and Richard Thornton was about to learn that some architects of justice, even when they're gone, still have the power to bring empires crumbling down. The old study hadn't changed much since Margaret's passing. The scent of aged paper and her faint floral perfume still lingered, a ghostly echo of her presence. Dust motes danced in the slivers of morning light filtering through the blinds. It was a room frozen in time, a sanctuary of intellect and quiet contemplation. I kept it that way, unable to bring myself to disturb her order. Now, it felt like a sacred duty. My gaze fell on an ornate mahogany desk, its surface scarred with faint rings from coffee mugs and the countless hours she'd spent hunched over it. Above it, on a small, unassuming shelf, stood a collection of antique trinkets she'd cherished. Among them, a miniature replica of the Brooklyn Bridge, intricately detailed, a gift from me years ago. It felt significant now, a silent irony. I reached for it, my fingers tracing the cold metal cables. Beneath it, hidden in a small, felt-lined compartment on the underside of the shelf, was a small, tarnished silver key. It was unlike any house key or car key. Older, with intricate engravings on its bow, an intertwined M and T for Margaret and Tommy, and a stylized symbol of a bridge. This was one of 5. I remembered the strongbox. Margaret had always kept it in the bottom drawer of her desk, locked. It was an old, heavy thing, made of dark, polished wood with brass fittings, the kind of relic you'd find in an old bank vault. I pulled the drawer open. There it was. My hands, calloused and rough, handled it with surprising gentleness. The silver key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. Inside, nestled on a velvet lining, were 5 other keys. They weren't identical to the first. These were all distinct, each with its own unique design, different metals, bronze, iron, polished steel, even one that looked like old gold. And each one had a tiny, almost invisible engraving, a date, or a single letter. These were the 5 keys Margaret had spoken of. Beneath them, I found the true treasures, a stack of yellowed papers, a slim leather-bound diary, a small, encrypted USB stick, and a single, sealed envelope addressed to me in Margaret's elegant handwriting. My heart ached with a mixture of grief and fierce resolve. I opened the envelope first. It was a letter dated just weeks before she died. Her voice, fragile but firm, spoke from the page. My dearest Tommy, if you are reading this, then either I am gone, or Sarah has found herself at a crossroads I always feared. Or perhaps both. I made you promise to deliver that message, and I trust you did. Now, I need you to understand why. And to finish what I started, my time at Thornton Group Legal was enlightening. Richard Thornton is not merely a shrewd businessman. He is a predator, devoid of ethics, cloaked in respectability. For years, I stumbled upon irregularities, brushed them off as minor miscalculations or aggressive accounting. But then came the Golden Bridge Project. The name, the Golden Bridge. It hit me like a revelation. It was a massive infrastructure initiative, a multi-billion-dollar public-private partnership to construct a new bridge connecting 2 key regions. On paper, a marvel. In reality, a colossal fraud. I discovered a complex web of shell companies, offshore accounts, inflated material costs, and bribes disguised as consulting fees. Richard Thornton, with the help of a few corrupt officials in his inner circle, was systematically siphoning off vast sums of public money, laundering it through a dozen different channels. It was audacious, brilliant in its criminality, and utterly heartbreaking in its implications for the taxpayers, for the real people who would rely on that bridge. I started collecting proof. Carefully, discreetly. It was a dangerous game. They were watching. I knew they suspected something when I started asking too many questions, when I seemed too interested in the audits of the subsidiary companies involved in the project. My illness gave me the perfect cover to withdraw, to work from home, to continue my investigation in secret. I feared for our safety, for Sarah's. If I went public then, they would have crushed me, discredited me, perhaps even silenced me permanently. So I built my own bridge, Tommy. A bridge of truth. I meticulously documented everything. Invoices, bank statements, internal emails, recorded conversations. The USB drive contains it all, encrypted with the password, your birthday, year, and our wedding anniversary date. The 5 keys? They're not just keys to this strongbox. They are keys to safety deposit boxes scattered across the city, each containing a fragmented piece of the evidence, designed to be released only if I disappeared or if Richard Thornton ever directly threatened our family. One of them, I believe, contains a final, damning piece of evidence that ties him directly to the disappearance of a whistleblower who tried to expose a smaller scam years ago. I couldn't bring myself to expose him fully while I was alive, not with Sarah so young, not with his power so absolute. I knew it would destroy everything we had, and I was too tired, too sick to fight that battle alone. But I couldn't let him get away with it. This is my legacy, Tommy. Not just for Sarah, but for the truth. For justice. Use this, Tommy. Use it to protect Sarah from the very darkness she so blindly chases. Use it to ensure that men like Richard Thornton do not simply win. And remember, my love, a builder like you knows that a rotten foundation will eventually bring down the entire structure, no matter how shiny the facade. Oh, my love, always. Margaret. My hands trembled as I finished reading. The air in the study felt thin, charged with Margaret's ghost, her unwavering strength, her quiet, terrifying resolve. She hadn't been a victim. She'd been a general, planning a posthumous war, arming me with the weapons to fight it. And her motivation wasn't just revenge, it was justice. A deep, abiding faith that the truth, eventually, would find its way to the surface. I looked at the 5 keys, then at the USB drive, a tiny conduit to years of secrets and carefully collected evidence. The Golden Bridge wasn't just a physical structure. It was the bridge of lies Richard Thornton had built. And Margaret, my brilliant, quiet Margaret, had found all the weak points in its foundation. I called Dave. "You find anything yet?" I asked, my voice tight. "Just started, Tommy," he replied. "But I did find a little something on the Golden Bridge project. It was riddled with cost overruns, delays, and a couple of those construction companies involved, they went belly up right after it finished. Sketchy stuff." "What?" "Because, Dave," I said, a grim smile forming on my lips, "Margaret just handed us the blueprint to tear it all down." The next few days were a blur of intense, calculated action. My quiet, unassuming life as a contractor was put on hold, replaced by late-night meetings with Dave, deciphering Margaret's meticulous notes and following the intricate breadcrumbs she'd left behind. The first task was to decrypt the USB drive. The password, 08121968102319995, my birthday and our wedding anniversary, was a painful reminder of the life we'd built and the love that fueled this grim quest. The drive was a treasure trove. Spreadsheets detailing suspicious transactions, scanned copies of offshore bank statements, internal memos with alarming annotations in Margaret's familiar hand, and even fragments of audio recordings, snippets of hushed conversations that implied coercion and cover-ups. The sheer volume and detail were overwhelming, a testament to Margaret's quiet brilliance and relentless pursuit of truth. She hadn't missed a single thread in Richard Thornton's elaborate tapestry of deceit. Dave, with his network of anonymous sources and his uncanny ability to make people talk, started piecing together the current state of affairs around the Golden Bridge project and the Thornton Group. He confirmed that a federal investigation into infrastructure fraud had recently stalled, citing lack of sufficient evidence. This was no coincidence. Richard Thornton had powerful friends, powerful enemies, and a reputation for crushing anyone who dared to oppose him. Meanwhile, the ripples from the wedding were starting to spread. Sarah called, her voice brittle with forced cheerfulness. "Dad, Caleb and I are back from our mini-moon. Look, about the other day, it was just the champagne talking, you know? And Mom's little riddles are so confusing. Can we just forget it? Everything's fine, isn't it?" Her attempt at reconciliation was transparent, coated in panic. The Thorntons were clearly applying pressure. I could almost hear Richard's voice in her words, his instructions on how to smooth things over. "Everything is far from fine, Sarah," I said, my voice calm, but with an underlying current that brooked no argument. "And your mother's riddles, as you call them, are about to become very clear. To everyone." She stammered, then started to cry, real tears this time. "Dad, please. You don't understand. Richard, he's furious. He said if you don't drop whatever this is, he'll ruin us. He'll ruin you." Your business, everything. He'll try, I said, a cold smile forming on my lips. But some foundations are built stronger than others, Sarah. Unlike the ones he favors. I hung up before she could respond, letting her stew in the fear Richard had instilled in her. It was a cruel necessity. She needed to feel the weight of what she'd embraced. The threats didn't stay verbal for long. My construction sites, usually meticulously organized, started experiencing unfortunate accidents. A generator blew, inexplicably. A shipment of critical steel beams was misrouted to a different state. Nothing catastrophic, nothing that couldn't be fixed, but enough to cause delays, cost money, and send a clear message. Richard Thornton was testing my resolve, tightening the screws. One evening, I found a brick thrown through my kitchen window, wrapped in an anonymous note. Drop it, pauper, or your house won't be the only thing that crumbles. It was crude but effective. Someone had been watching. Someone was always watching. I didn't flinch. These were parlor games compared to the battles I'd fought in the docks, the skirmishes over contracts and territories, the veiled threats that had sometimes turned very real. They thought they could intimidate me with property damage and veiled warnings. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They thought I was just a simple contractor, a pauper. Let them. I called Dave. They're getting sloppy, I observed, staring at the shattered glass. A brick through a window? That's amateur hour. But it means they're worried. They're scared. Worried enough for me to find a tail on you. Tommy, Dave reported grimly. A black Escalade, usually parked a few blocks away. Professional, but not invisible. Good, I said, a plan already forming in my mind. Let them watch. Let them think they're in control. It's time for the next step. The keys. Margaret's strongbox contained not just the USB, but also the locations of 5 safe deposit boxes scattered across Manhattan and even one in New Jersey. Each key was for a specific box. These were the fragments of proof, distributed like landmines, designed to detonate at different times, in different places, to create maximum chaos and make it impossible for Thornton to contain the fallout. The first key led me to a small, unassuming bank in the financial district. I walked in, dressed in my usual work clothes, a nondescript figure among the sharply dressed bankers and brokers. The bank manager, a polite, elderly woman, led me to a private room. Inside the deposit box, I found a slim file, copies of invoices signed by a subsidiary of Thornton Group for materials that were clearly overpriced, dated just before the Golden Bridge project began. More damning, a coded ledger with names and offshore account numbers. The second key led to a more obscure bank in Chinatown. This box held a series of shell company and corporation documents, all linked to the Golden Bridge, all with the same registered agent, a shadowy law firm known for its ties to organized crime. The third, a bank in Trenton, New Jersey. This one contained a series of encrypted emails between Richard Thornton and a disgraced former city official, discussing expedited permits and performance bonuses that smelled suspiciously like bribes. Each discovery was a fresh wound, a new piece of the puzzle that painted Richard Thornton as a ruthless, calculating criminal. But it was the fourth key that truly chilled me. It led to a small, nearly abandoned bank in a forgotten corner of the Bronx. Inside the deposit box, I found not just documents, but an old, grainy photograph. It showed a man, young, earnest, standing in front of a half-built bridge. A face I didn't recognize, but his eyes held a familiar fire. Tucked beneath the photo was a faded news clipping. Whistleblower disappears before testifying on construction fraud. The date of the disappearance coincided eerily with the early stages of the Golden Bridge project, and a single, handwritten note from Margaret. He knew too much. Richard silenced him. This is the truth, Tommy. Margaret hadn't just been fighting corruption. She'd been fighting for justice for the dead. The weight of it settled on my shoulders, heavy and cold. I knew then that Richard Thornton wasn't just a white-collar criminal. He was dangerous, and I was walking into a war. But I also knew Margaret had entrusted me with this, not just as her husband, but as the man she knew could finish it. The bulldog, they called me. And bulldogs, once they get their teeth in, don't let go. Not until the job is done. The discovery of the whistleblower's photograph and Margaret's chilling note solidified everything. This wasn't just about money, or even just about Sarah's misguided ambitions. This was about a life extinguished for greed. Richard Thornton wasn't just a crook, he was a murderer. My quiet, brilliant wife had walked a tightrope of danger, collecting evidence not just to expose, but to ensure justice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. The realization ignited a cold, steady fire in my gut. There was one key left. The fifth. Margaret's instructions for this one were different. It wasn't a location, but an instruction. When all seems lost and the path is obscured, seek the guardian of unspoken truths. He holds the final piece. Below it, a name and a number. Mr. Smith, XXX, XXXXXX. A generic name, a burner phone number, a testament to Margaret's paranoia, or rather, her foresight. I called the number from a burner phone Dave had provided. It rang twice, then a calm, elderly voice answered. Smith. No pleasantries, just a simple, direct response. My kind of man. My name is Thomas O'Connor, I said, my voice measured. I was married to Margaret O'Connor. I have a message from her. She mentioned 5 keys, 1 strongbox, and the Golden Bridge. A beat of silence. Then, Thomas, I've been expecting your call, eventually. Or someone's. Margaret was very particular. Come to my office. You know where 1 Liberty Plaza is. He gave me the suite number. I went alone. Dave, despite his protests, stayed behind, monitoring the threats against my properties, keeping the heat off me. My instinct told me this meeting needed to be just me. Mr. Smith was exactly as I'd pictured him. A man in his late 70s, impeccably dressed in a tweed suit, his desk meticulously organized, not a single paper out of place. He had sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and an air of quiet authority that immediately put me at ease, despite the gravity of our situation. Thomas, he said, rise and shake my hand, his grip surprisingly firm. Please sit. Margaret spoke of you often, with immense love and even more respect. She said you were the only one who could truly finish what she started. I placed the strongbox on his desk. She was a remarkable woman. Indeed, he agreed, a soft smile touching his lips. And she was very shrewd. She knew the kind of monsters she was dealing with. And she knew that one day, those monsters would come for her, or for her family. He explained, Mr. Smith wasn't just Margaret's lawyer. He was her confidant, her co-conspirator in the pursuit of justice. He specialized in high-stakes corporate whistleblowing, operating mostly off the grid, protecting sources from powerful adversaries. Margaret, seeing the depth of Richard Thornton's corruption and the danger it posed, had approached him years ago. Margaret didn't just collect evidence, Thomas, Mr. Smith said, his voice low and precise. She engineered its release. She knew she couldn't take on Richard Thornton directly without risking everything, including your lives. So, she created a fail-safe, a mechanism. The 5th key, it's not a physical key to a box. It's the key to a release. The release of all her evidence. He pushed a thick, red-bound dossier across the desk. This contains a complete, authenticated copy of everything on that USB drive, along with additional sworn affidavits and expert analyses. It's been sitting in a secure, off-site vault, set to be digitally released to the relevant authorities, the FBI, the SEC, the Department of Justice, and several key investigative journalists, at a predetermined trigger point. My breath hitched. A trigger point? Yes, Mr. Smith confirmed. Margaret set a series of conditions. 1. If she passed away unexpectedly. 2. If her family was ever directly threatened. 3. If her daughter, Sarah, ever married into the Thornton family, thereby putting herself and her inheritance, which, by the way, is substantial and tied into a separate, legitimate trust Margaret established, at risk. She believed such a union would be the ultimate culmination of Richard Thornton's manipulative ambition, a sign that he would stop at nothing to expand his influence and silence any potential threats. He looked at me, his gaze unwavering. Your speech at the wedding, Thomas. Those words. 5 keys, 1 strongbox, Golden Bridge. Margaret had meticulously outlined that if you, her husband, ever uttered those exact phrases in a public forum, especially one involving the Thorntons, it would confirm that her conditions had been met. It would activate the release. The system is fully automated. The trigger was pulled the moment you spoke those words. I felt a jolt of both awe and dread. Margaret, my quiet, brilliant Margaret. She hadn't just suspected, she'd known. She'd orchestrated her own posthumous justice, a slow-burning fuse set to ignite at the perfect, most public moment. She had used my love, my quiet strength, and Sarah's public betrayal to ensure Richard Thornton's reckoning. So it's already out there? I asked, a strange mix of relief and terror washing over me. No, Mr. Smith corrected gently. The mechanism has been activated. The clock is ticking. The evidence is programmed for a delayed release. 24 hours from the moment you spoke those words. Margaret wanted to give Richard Thornton one last chance to realize the inevitable, to feel the walls closing in before the whole world came crashing down on him. And she wanted to give you, Thomas, the opportunity to deliver the final blow, to choose the time and the place. He pushed a small, encrypted tablet across the desk. This device is linked to the system. It allows you to accelerate the release, to push it through immediately if you deem it necessary, or to let the timer run out. But once released, there's no stopping it. It's designed to be irreversible, untraceable back to any single point. I picked up the tablet, its cool surface feeling heavy in my hand. Margaret's genius was chilling. She had anticipated every move, every contingency. She hadn't just collected evidence. She had built an entire strategic operation, designed to unfold with the precision of a master chess player. And she had made me her final, most potent piece. What about Sarah? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her inheritance? Will she be caught in the crossfire? No, Mr. Smith assured me. Margaret was meticulous. Her personal wealth, accumulated from her legitimate legal work and shrewd investments, is separate and protected in a trust that is untouchable by Thornton Group's collapse. It's substantial, enough to secure her future, even without the Thorntons. It was always her deepest wish to provide for Sarah, no matter what path she chose. But the trust dictates that she can only access the full extent of it once she's reached a certain age and proven her financial independence for a period of 5 years, ensuring she doesn't squander it on fleeting desires or allow others to control her. A wave of emotion washed over me. Sarah's cruel words at the wedding, her dismissive call about me being a pathetic pauper Margaret had known, had protected her even from herself. I looked at the tablet, then at Mr. Smith. Richard Thornton will be looking for a way out. He'll be trying to shut this down. He'll come after me. Undoubtedly, Mr. Smith nodded. But he doesn't know what he's looking for. He doesn't know the full scope of Margaret's plan. He thinks you're just an angry, grieving husband with some vague threats. He doesn't know you're holding the detonator to his entire empire. I gripped the tablet, the cold fire in my gut turning into a burning resolve. Then it's time to give him a chance to feel the heat, I said, my voice steady. He chose this fight. Margaret chose the weapon, and I'm going to deliver the final blow. Let's prepare for the ultimate unraveling of the Golden Bridge. The stage was set, not for a wedding, but for a reckoning. And I, Tommy Bulldog O'Connor, the unassuming contractor, was about to become the architect of Richard Thornton's downfall. The next 24 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Richard Thornton was a cornered animal, but a dangerous one. Mr. Smith had given me the tools, but Margaret had given me the blueprint for how Richard's mind worked. His arrogance, his belief in his own untouchability, those were his biggest weaknesses, and I intended to exploit every single one of them. Dave, bless his methodical heart, was already at work. Following Margaret's subtle instructions, he begun planting anonymous, cryptic leaks in obscure financial blogs and forums, hints about imminent federal probes and unraveling infrastructure scams related to a prominent NYC investment firm. Nothing concrete enough to trigger an immediate investigation, but enough to create a tremor. The goal wasn't to expose yet, but to sow panic, to make Richard sweat, to force his hand. They're starting to notice Tommy, Dave reported, his voice tight over the secure line. Thornton Group's stock took a dip this morning. Nothing major, but it's a ripple. And I heard chatter from contact at the SEC. They're monitoring unusual trading activity around Thornton. Someone's dumping shares or buying up short positions. Someone knows something. Good, I responded. Keep the pressure on. Make him feel like the walls are closing in, but he can't see the hand that's closing them. The calls from Sarah intensified. She was a wreck. Caleb, apparently, was barely speaking to her, terrified that his name would be dragged through the mud. Richard, she sobbed, was terrifying. He'd confined her to their penthouse, demanding she find out what I knew, threatening to cut off her allowances, her credit cards, everything. The reality of her marriage, the brittle facade of her true family, was shattering before her eyes. He called you a pathetic pauper, Dad. He said you were a fool, she wailed. And now he's saying if this gets out, if anything affects his business, he'll disinherit Caleb. He'll make us destitute. Destitute, Sarah? I asked, my voice flat. You have no idea what that word means. Your mother made sure you never would. But your choices, and his, will have consequences. I didn't offer comfort. I couldn't. Not yet. She needed to feel the full, crushing weight of her disdain, the price of her ambition. She needed to understand what her mother had sacrificed, what I was now risking, to protect her from the very monster she'd willingly embraced. Later that day, Richard Thornton himself called. No pleasantries. His voice was like polished steel, smooth but cold. Thomas, we need to talk. My office. An hour. Alone. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. I paused, letting him wait. Your office, Richard? No, I don't think so. I prefer neutral ground, and I won't be alone. I'll bring someone who understands the intricacies of golden bridges and their foundations. I heard his sharp intake of breath. He knew. He suspected I had something, but he couldn't grasp the extent. This is highly irregular, Thomas. Life is full of irregularities, Richard, I countered, especially when you build your life on them. Be at the old coffee shop on Montague Street in Brooklyn, the one by the promenade. An hour. And don't bring your goons. I'll know. He snarled something unintelligible, then hung up. He was losing control, and it chafed him. Good. The coffee shop was an old haunt, a place Margaret and I used to grab breakfast on weekends. It was bustling, anonymous, filled with the everyday hum of real people. The perfect stage. I arrived early, settling into a booth with Dave, who sat discreetly, pretending to read a newspaper but watching the door. I had the encrypted tablet from Mr. Smith tucked into my inner pocket. Richard arrived precisely on time, alone. He spotted me and, with a grimace, made his way to our booth. He looked strained, his usual veneer of supreme confidence cracked around the edges. His eyes, though still sharp, held a desperate edge. He ordered a black coffee, his hand trembling slightly as he picked up the mug. All right, Thomas, he began, his voice low, filled with suppressed rage. What is this? Some pathetic attempt at blackmail? You think you can rattle me with some cryptic message from your dead wife and a few vague threats? No blackmail, Richard, I said, meeting his gaze evenly. Just truth. Your truth. And Margaret's truth. She knew about the Golden Bridge. All of it. The inflated contracts, the bribes, the shell companies, the stolen money, and the whistleblower, Richard, the man who disappeared. His face went ashen again. The color drained, leaving him looking like a ghost. He glanced nervously around the bustling coffee shop, checking if anyone was listening. You're delusional. You have no proof. Just the ramblings of a dying woman. Do I? I asked, a slow smile spreading across my face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had his prey cornered. Margaret wasn't rambling, Richard. She was building a case. Brick by brick, document by document. And she didn't just build it, she insured it. She set on a timer. And that timer, Richard, is ticking down right now. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. Every fraudulent invoice, every offshore transaction, every email, every recording, it's all set to go public. To the FBI, the SEC, the Department of Justice, and every major news outlet. In less than 24 hours. Unless you want to accelerate the process. I have the trigger right here. I tapped my inner jacket pocket. His eyes darted to my pocket, then back to my face, a desperate fear warring with his ingrained arrogance. You're bluffing. You don't have that kind of power. Oh, I think I do, I said. Margaret made sure of it. She wanted you to feel the squeeze, to know that the empire you built on lies is about to crumble, and she wanted me to be the one to watch it fall. He slammed his hand on the table, making the coffee cups jump. What do you want, you old fool? Money? A bigger payout for Sarah? Name your price. I can make this go away. You still don't get it, do you, Richard? I sighed, shaking my head. It's not about money. It's about justice. It's about Margaret. And it's about your daughter, Sarah. She called me a pauper. She embraced your world of lies. Now, she gets to see the true cost of it. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, primal fear. He saw not a pauper, but a man of unwavering resolve, armed with the undeniable truth. He saw Margaret's legacy distilled into my quiet, implacable rage. You won't get away with this, O'Connor, he hissed, his voice trembling slightly. I'll bury you. I'll make sure you lose everything. You can try, I said, pushing my unfinished coffee away. But you're trying to bury a man who knows how to dig. And the ground you're standing on, Richard, is about to open up beneath your feet. I stood up, leaving him sitting there alone, a powerful man utterly powerless, trapped in the web of his own making. As I walked out, Dave discreetly slipped out behind me, leaving Richard Thornton to contemplate the impending abyss. The countdown had begun, and the architect of retribution was ready to watch his golden bridge collapse. The call came an hour after my meeting with Richard. It was Mr. Smith. Thomas, I just received a frantic call from an anonymous source at Thorn Group. Richard is in a full-blown panic. He's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning, and he's frantically trying to mobilize his legal team. He's also put out feelers for a major public relations event, a press conference, a charity gala, anything to restore confidence and project an image of stability. He's trying to get ahead of it, I observed, trying to spin a narrative before the truth hits. Precisely, Mr. Smith confirmed. He wants to control the message, to mitigate the damage. He's announced a significant philanthropic donation to a local community development fund, specifically for underserved neighborhoods. He's painting himself as a benefactor, a pillar of the community. I let out a mirthless chuckle. Figures. The oldest trick in the book. Buy goodwill to cover up the bad. Where's this press conference taking place? At the Thornton Group's flagship building, in their grand ballroom. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. It's a very public spectacle. Perfect, I said. Margaret would have appreciated the irony. This was it. The stage Richard had unwittingly set for his own public dismantling. I spent the rest of the evening with Dave and Mr. Smith, meticulously reviewing Margaret's files, preparing the final presentation. We didn't need to do much. Margaret had done 99% of the work. Our job was simply to package it, to ensure the narrative was undeniable, impactful, and delivered at the precise moment to achieve maximum effect. The key is not to accuse directly, Thomas, Mr. Smith advised, adjusting his spectacles. It's to present the facts, the irrefutable evidence, and let the truth speak for itself. Let their numbers tell the story. Let their documents incriminate them. And the whistleblower, I added, looking at the faded photograph. He gets his justice too. Absolutely, Mr. Smith affirmed. Margaret was very clear on that. His story, his sacrifice, must be part of the narrative. We assembled a concise, powerful presentation, side-by-side comparisons of official project costs versus actual expenditures, tracing the financial flows through shell companies, highlighting the glaring discrepancies. Charts, graphs, even carefully edited audio snippets from Margaret's recordings, all designed to be projected onto a large screen, impossible to ignore. It was a lawyer's dream, a corporate criminal's nightmare. Just as we were finalizing the details, Dave's phone rang. His face, usually calm under pressure, tightened. He listened for a moment, then cursed softly. "What is it, Dave?" I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach. He hung up, his jaw clenched. "My contact at the docks. Someone tampered with the loading equipment at your main construction site. A crane malfunction. They say it was maintenance error, but my guy says it was sabotage. Pure dumb luck, no one was under it. Someone could have been killed, Tommy. The air in the room grew heavy, chilling. Richard wasn't just playing dirty, he was playing for keeps. He was sending a clear, unambiguous message. Back off, or people get hurt. My people. And they think I'm just a pathetic pauper who won't fight back. I murmured, my voice dangerously low. The thought of one of my crew members, a father, a husband, getting hurt because of Richard's desperation, because of my fight, fueled a new, searing wave of fury. It wasn't just about Margaret anymore. It was about protecting what she'd cherished, what we'd built, not just the concrete structures, but the community, the people who worked honest jobs, who believed in honest work. This changes things, Thomas, Mr. Smith said, his voice grave. Richard is escalating. He's showing he's willing to cross lines. I looked at the tablet, at the countdown timer for Margaret's automated release system. Less than 18 hours left. I could accelerate it. Press the button. Let the truth explode right now. But no, Richard wanted to make a statement. He wanted to project strength, benevolence, control. He wanted his press conference. And I would let him have it. I would let him stand on his grand stage, under the glittering lights, feeling triumphant. And then I would pull the rug out from under him. I would show him the true meaning of a broken foundation. No, I said, my voice steady, my eyes fixed on the blank screen where the damning evidence would soon appear. It doesn't change things. It clarifies them. He wants to play in public? Fine. The show must go on. But he won't be dictating the script. Tomorrow, at 10 a.m., the true architect of the Golden Bridge will finally be revealed. And it won't be him. I felt Margaret's presence in the room, a quiet approval. She had armed me not just with evidence, but with patience, with strategy. She knew that some battles weren't won with brute force, but with timing, precision, and an unshakable belief in the power of truth. The final act was upon us, and Richard Thornton was about to learn that some lessons, the most expensive ones, are taught by the quietest men. The Thornton Group's grand ballroom, typically reserved for lavish corporate celebrations, felt less like a venue for philanthropy and more like a courtroom. Every major news outlet was there, cameras flashing, microphones bristling. Reporters buzzed, smelling blood in the water. Richard Thornton, flanked by a phalanx of grim-faced lawyers and an increasingly agitated Caleb, stood at a gleaming podium emblazoned with the Thornton Group logo. He looked composed, almost regal, but I could see the subtle tremble in his hand as he adjusted his tie, the faint sheen of sweat on his brow under the harsh lights. He was playing a part, and he was struggling. I sat in the third row, a silent observer in my unassuming suit, blending perfectly into the background of junior executives and less important journalists. Dave was a few rows back, his eyes scanning the room, his hand subtly resting on the small recorder in his pocket. Mr. Smith, blending in like a shadow, was positioned near the back, ready to observe the chaos about to ensue. The room quieted as Richard tapped the microphone. He began with a practiced smile, a smooth, confident delivery. He spoke of the Thornton Group's unwavering commitment to ethical business practices, of their deep roots in the community, of his personal dedication to philanthropy. He announced a multi-million-dollar donation to the very community development fund that was meant to offset the damage from the Golden Bridge project, a brazen act of damage control. He even made a subtle, veiled reference to unscrupulous individuals attempting to tarnish a respected name with baseless accusations, his eyes sweeping over the crowd, daring anyone to challenge him. I let him talk, let him build his narrative, layer his lies. The timer on Mr. Smith's tablet, discreetly placed under my arm, was ticking down. Less than 5 minutes until Margaret's meticulously prepared evidence would hit the digital airways. I could feel the tension radiating from Richard, his desperate need to assert control, to project an image of impregnable power. He was a performance, waiting for his final curtain. Then he paused, surveying the room with a triumphant smirk, as if daring anyone to dispute his fabricated reality. "Are there any questions?" he finally asked, a challenge in his voice. Several hands shot up, but before he could pick one, I slowly, deliberately rose from my seat. My movement was subtle, yet authoritative. The murmurs in the room died down. All eyes, including Richard's, turned to me. His triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of fear and incredulity. Caleb, behind him, looked terrified. "Yes, Mr. Thornton," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, calm and steady, amplified by the natural acoustics of the ballroom. "I have a question. Not for you, actually, but a message. From someone who couldn't be here today, but who nevertheless sends her regards." Richard's face went white. He knew. He finally, truly knew. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His lawyers exchanged frantic glances. "You see, Mr. Thornton," I continued, walking slowly towards the podium, the journalists already turning their cameras towards me, sensing the seismic shift. "My wife, Margaret O'Connor, always believed in honesty. She believed that true foundations are built on truth, not on lies and stolen money. And she also believed that sometimes the most profound messages are delivered at the most inconvenient times." I reached the podium, facing the sea of flashing cameras and stunned faces. I looked directly at Richard Thornton, whose eyes were wide with terror. Caleb looked utterly lost. "Margaret asked me to tell you, and everyone here today," I said, my voice resonating with an authority that belied my unassuming appearance, "that the Golden Bridge, it was never just a project, was it, Richard? It was a metaphor for everything rotten you built your empire upon." Then I raised the tablet from my pocket. It glowed with a single green message: "Release activated." "The time has come," I announced, my voice clear and unwavering, "for the truth to finally see the light of day. Your daughter, Sarah, called me a pauper. She called me out of place in your world. And perhaps I am. Because in my world, Richard, we believe in honest work. We believe in building things that last. And we believe that those who steal from the public, those who manipulate and betray trust, those who silence whistleblowers for profit, they will eventually pay their price." I pressed a button on the tablet. Instantly, the massive screens on either side of the podium, which had moments ago displayed the Thornton Group logo, flickered. Then they exploded with data. Not just any data, but meticulously constructed presentation that Margaret and I had prepared. The Golden Bridge Project, a deception unveiled. The ballroom erupted. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed wildly. The screens displayed damning evidence. Side-by-side financial statements showing monumental discrepancies, anonymized bank records tracing millions to offshore accounts, internal emails from Richard Thornton himself detailing cost-saving measures that were clearly illegal kickbacks, and even snippets of Margaret's audio recordings, played for all to hear, exposing the collusion. The image of the disappeared whistleblower, his earnest face staring out from the screen, accompanied by news clippings of his last known whereabouts, created a collective gasp in the room. Richard Thornton staggered back, his face a mask of horror. His lawyers lunged forward, shouting, trying to disconnect the screens, but it was too late. The information was out, not just on the screens, but, thanks to Margaret's automated system, already flooding the inboxes of every major federal agency and news organization in the country. This, ladies and gentlemen, I continued, my voice cutting through the cacophony, is the legacy of the Golden Bridge. Not a monument of progress, but a monument of corruption. My wife, Margaret O'Connor, spent her final years uncovering this truth because she believed that no man, no matter how powerful, should be above the law. She believed in justice, and she made sure that one day that justice would be served. I turned to Sarah, who had slipped in unnoticed, standing frozen at the back of the room, her eyes wide, tears streaming down her face as she watched her father's empire crumble before her, live on national television. She saw the evidence, the undeniable truth of her mother's meticulous work. She saw the man she'd called a pauper, standing firm, delivering a truth she had rejected. "Your mother, Sarah," I said, my voice softening just for her, was an architect of justice. And this golden bridge, which you so readily embraced, is now the very thing that will bring down the lies around you. She loved you, enough to protect you, even from yourself. The federal agents, tipped off by Mr. Smith, had already entered the room. They moved swiftly, purposefully, towards Richard Thornton. He looked around, trapped, cornered, his reign of corruption finally at an end. His eyes met mine one last time, filled not with anger, but with a profound, terrifying defeat. He had underestimated the quiet man, the pauper. He had underestimated Margaret. And now he paid the price. The ballroom was a storm of flashing lights, shouting reporters, and the dawning realization of a colossal scandal. I, Thomas O'Connor, the man who was just the father of the bride, the pathetic pauper, stood amidst it all, a quiet pillar of resolve. The show was over, and the truth, Margaret's truth, had finally prevailed. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The news exploded. Thornton Group scandal. CEO Richard Thornton arrested on fraud charges. Whistleblower vindicated. The headline screamed. The financial markets reeled. What had been a private family drama had become a national spectacle. The images of Richard Thornton being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, were plastered across every screen. The Golden Bridge, once a symbol of his power, became the emblem of his spectacular downfall. FBI agents and SEC investigators swarmed the Thornton Group's offices, seizing documents, interviewing employees. The empire built on greed and deceit began to unravel with astonishing speed. Shell companies were exposed, offshore accounts frozen, corrupt officials implicated. It was a domino effect, precisely as Margaret had engineered. Caleb, true to his nature, was nowhere to be found. He'd vanished the moment the feds appeared, clearly attempting to distance himself from his father's crimes. His marriage to Sarah, already a fragile thing, shattered completely. She was left alone in the opulent penthouse, a gilded cage that had suddenly lost its shine, stripped of the status and security she had so desperately sought. A few days later, after the initial storm had passed, Sarah came to my house. She didn't call ahead. She just showed up, driven by a taxi, a stark contrast to the luxury cars she once commanded. She looked utterly broken. Her designer clothes were rumpled, her face pale and tear-streaked, her eyes hollow. The confident, ambitious young woman who had publicly humiliated me on her wedding day was gone, replaced by a ghost. I answered the door, my expression unreadable. She just stood there, clutching a small purse, her shoulders slumped. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I saw it. Everything. On the news. Mom, she really did all that." I stepped aside, letting her in. The house, humble compared to what she'd grown accustomed to, felt warm, solid, real. "Yes, Sarah," I said, my voice quiet. She did. Every last piece. She wanted the truth to come out. For everyone. And for you. She sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "I don't understand. Why? Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't you tell me?" I sat opposite her, letting her cry, letting the raw emotion pour out. This wasn't the time for accusations or lectures. It was the time for truth, delivered with the quiet, unvarnished honesty Margaret had always championed. "Your mother loved you more than anything, Sarah," I began, my voice filled with a tenderness I hadn't allowed myself to show since the wedding. "More than her career, more than justice itself. Sometimes. That's why she didn't tell you. She was trying to protect you. From Richard. From the danger she was in. From the ugly truth of that world you were so eager to join. But she let me marry Caleb," she choked out. "No, Sarah. She gave you a choice. She gave you a path. But she also set up a safety net. And an alarm system. She knew that if you truly chose that life, if you married into that corruption, it would be the ultimate sign that you had forgotten who you were and where you came from. And that's when her plan would activate. Not to punish you, but to protect you from a future built on lies." I reached for an old, leather-bound photo album, one Margaret had meticulously filled. I opened it to a picture of a much younger Sarah, giggling on my shoulders at Coney Island, sticky with cotton candy, Her face lit up with pure, unadulterated joy. A picture of Margaret, strong and vibrant, holding Sarah's tiny hand, teaching her to tie her shoelaces. She always wanted you to be free, Sarah, I continued. Free to choose your own path. But she also wanted you to be free from manipulation, free from deceit. And she knew that true freedom sometimes comes with a hard reckoning. But I called you a pauper, she whispered, her voice laced with self-loathing. I was so cruel. I was so blind. I was so ashamed of this. She gestured vaguely around my solid, comfortable home, the home I had built with my own hands. You were chasing something hollow, Sarah, I said gently. Something that glittered but had no substance. Your mother's legacy isn't the millions she left you, which, by the way, are substantial and protected in a trust she set up to keep you safe and independent. Her real legacy is the truth, the courage to stand against injustice, the belief that integrity matters more than wealth. I explained about the trust, about how Margaret had set it up so Sarah couldn't squander it, couldn't be manipulated, couldn't access the full amount until she had proven her independence and earned her own way for a period. It was a final lesson, a challenge from her mother to truly find herself. She wanted you to build your own bridge, Sarah, I said. A real one. Not one built on lies, but on your own 2 feet. She always believed you had the strength for it. Just like she did. Sarah looked at me, her eyes slowly losing some of their emptiness, replaced by a glimmer of understanding, and perhaps a flicker of that old fire that had once burned in her mother. So, all that money from the Thornton Group, that's gone now, right? That money, Sarah, was never yours, I said, my voice firm. It was stolen, and your mother made sure it will be returned to the people it was stolen from. She established a special fund, managed by Mr. Smith, to compensate the victims of the Golden Bridge fraud and to support community projects in the very neighborhoods Richard Thornton exploited. That's her true inheritance. That's her ultimate justice. She listened, her face a mix of shock and dawning realization. Her mother wasn't just a victim. She was a hero, a quiet warrior who had engineered a profound act of justice. And I, her father, the pathetic pauper, had been her instrument. The conversation wasn't about forgiveness, not yet. It was about truth, about understanding, about the shattering of a false reality and the painful, yet necessary, birth of a new one. Sarah had lost her opulent future, her social climbing, her superficial marriage. But perhaps, just perhaps, she had gained something far more valuable. The truth about her mother, the true measure of her father, and the chance to build a life of genuine value. The empire was shattered, and with it, a part of Sarah's heart. But in its place, perhaps a seed of something real, something strong, had finally begun to grow. Months have passed since the dust settled. The Thornton Group, once a titan of finance, is now a shell of its former self, its assets being liquidated to pay off debts and compensate victims. Richard Thornton is in federal prison, facing a long, well-deserved sentence. Caleb, last I heard, was trying to make a living as a crypto influencer in Miami, a pathetic echo of his former gilded life, his name forever tainted by his father's crimes. The world, the one Sarah had so desperately craved, had chewed them up and spat them out. My life, surprisingly, has returned to a semblance of normal, albeit a new normal. The pathetic pauper is now regarded with a quiet reverence by those who know. My construction business, always solid, has flourished. People respect honesty, especially when it goes up against the kind of power Richard Thornton wielded. I've even taken on a few pro bono projects, building community centers and renovating affordable housing, channeling Margaret's spirit of helping those who can't help themselves. Dave, my loyal friend, has seen his detective agency boom, taking on more ethical, high-stakes cases. Mr. Smith continues his quiet work, a guardian of truth in a world full of shadows. And Sarah, her path has been the hardest. She didn't get an easy forgiveness, and she didn't ask for one. She sold her engagement ring, a massive diamond that felt like a symbol of her folly. She got a job, a humble one, at a local nonprofit focused on urban development. Ironically enough, helping to rebuild some of the very communities Richard Thornton had plundered. She lives in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, not far from where I grew up. She visits me sometimes. We don't talk much about the past, not directly. We talk about her work, about the challenges she faces, about the small victories she achieves. I see a quiet determination in her eyes now, a resilience I didn't know she possessed. She's learning to build her own foundation, brick by painstaking brick. She's finally understanding what it means to earn something, to truly contribute, rather than simply acquire. Her mother's trust fund remains untouched by Sarah. She knows it's there, a safety net, but she refuses to rely on it. She's determined to earn her way, to prove to herself, and perhaps to Margaret's memory, that she can stand on her own 2 feet. It's a slow process, this rebuilding of a life, of a spirit. But I see the progress. I see the woman Margaret knew she could be, slowly emerging from the wreckage. I often sit on my porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues over the Queen's skyline. It's a familiar ritual, a moment of quiet reflection. My hands, still rough from a day's work, are now holding something different. Not just a whiskey glass, but the weight of a profound truth. Margaret, her quiet strength, her unwavering commitment to justice, her foresight in planning every detail of Richard Thornton's downfall, even from her deathbed. She didn't just expose a criminal, she forced a reckoning. She didn't just seek revenge, she orchestrated justice. She showed the world that even the most formidable empires can crumble if their foundations are built on lies. I pull out an old, worn photograph from my wallet. It's a picture of Margaret, younger, vibrant, her eyes sparkling with that unique blend of intelligence and love that captivated me from the moment we met. She's smiling, a knowing smile, as if she always knew how things would turn out. "You got your justice, Margie," I whisper, my voice rough with emotion. "And you gave Sarah something far more valuable than wealth. You gave her the truth, the chance to build a real life." I look out at the fading light, at the city that never sleeps, the city that is constantly being torn down and rebuilt. And I know, with a deep, settled certainty, that some bridges are made of steel and concrete, but the strongest ones are built from truth, integrity, and an unshakable belief in what's right. And for that, for Margaret, for the quiet truth, it was all worth fighting for. The fight for justice, I've learned, never truly ends. It just finds new architects. And I'm still here, ready to lay the next brick.